Have you ever sat in a room full of people you love, watching them destroy your life with lies and felt completely powerless to stop it? Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible while everyone around you rewrites your reality? I have. I lived it. And let me tell you, the courtroom isn't like what you see in movies. There's no dramatic music, no perfectly timed revelations. There's just cold air, uncomfortable wooden benches, and the echo of voices you've known your entire life speaking words that cut deeper than any knife ever could. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened to me, what I watched unfold with my own eyes, and how one small detail, something I didn't even notice myself, changed everything. This is the story of how I sat there silent and shaking, as my own family lied under oath, and how a sharp-eyed lawyer saw what no one else did. This is about betrayal, truth, and the moment everything came crashing down. I need to take you back to understand how we got here, to understand why I was sitting in that courtroom in the first place. My family always looked perfect from the outside. We were the kind of family people envied at neighborhood gatherings. My father was a successful businessman, the kind of man who commanded respect when he walked into a room. My mother was elegant, always put together, always saying the right things at the right time. My older brother was the golden child, the achiever, the one who could do no wrong in anyone's eyes. And then there was me. I was the middle child, the quiet one, the one who learned early on that sometimes it's easier to stay silent than to speak up and cause waves. I loved my family deeply, with that unconditional love that children have for their parents and siblings, the kind of love that makes you overlook things you probably shouldn't overlook. Growing up, I noticed things, small things at first. The way my father's stories about business deals would change depending on who was listening. The way my mother would smile at neighbors while whispering harsh criticisms the moment we were alone in the car. The way my brother learned to manipulate situations to always come out looking innocent, even when he wasn't. But I told myself these were normal family quirks. Everyone's family had secrets, right? Everyone's parents bent the truth a little sometimes, didn't they? I convinced myself that what I was seeing wasn't really what I thought it was. I gasped down my own instincts, my own observations, because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging that my family wasn't what I desperately wanted them to be. The real trouble started about 3 years ago, though the seeds were planted long before that. My father's business partner, a man named Richard whom I'd known since I was a child, came to our house one evening. I remember it was raining, one of those heavy summer storms that makes everything smell like earth and electricity. Richard looked different that night. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked like desperation mixed with anger. I was upstairs, supposedly doing homework, but I could hear raised voices filtering up through the floorboards. I crept to the top of the stairs, staying hidden in the shadows, and listened to words that would haunt me for years to come. Fraud, embezzlement, falsified documents. These weren't words I associated with my father, with my family, with the life I thought I knew. Richard was accusing my father of stealing from their company, of creating false accounts, of siphoning money that should have been shared profits into personal investments. My father's voice was calm, too calm, in that way that always made my stomach twist into knots. He wasn't denying it, not really. Instead, he was explaining, justifying, making it sound like what he'd done was necessary, even smart. My mother was there too, and I could hear her supporting him, adding her own rationalizations, talking about how Richard didn't understand the complexities of business, how he was overreacting, how he should just trust them and let it go. My brother joined in, his voice dripping with that condescension he'd perfected over the years, suggesting that Richard was simply jealous of our father's success. I sat on those stairs for what felt like hours, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone in the house must be able to hear it. This couldn't be real. My father was a good man. My family was honest. We were the people others looked up to. But the conversation I was hearing told a completely different story. Richard left that night angry and threatening legal action. I heard the door slam, heard my father cursing, heard my mother's voice rising in pitch as she asked what they were going to do, and I heard my brother suggest something that made my blood run cold. They needed to make sure their story was straight, needed to make sure everyone knew what to say if anyone started asking questions. They were planning to lie. They were planning to coordinate their lies. And somehow I knew that eventually I would be expected to lie too. The weeks that followed were like watching a carefully choreographed play. My family became actors, rehearsing their lines, perfecting their performances. Dinner table conversations that used to be about mundane daily events became strategy sessions. My father would go over details of business transactions, making sure everyone knew the correct version of events. My mother would add emotional touches to the narrative, painting Richard as an unstable, vindictive person who had always been jealous of my father's success. My brother played his part perfectly, the loyal son who stood by his father without question. And me? I was expected to simply nod along, to absorb their version of reality, to accept that what I'd heard that rainy night was somehow justified or misunderstood. I want you to understand the position I was in, the impossible choice that was slowly being forced upon me. This wasn't some distant moral dilemma discussed in a philosophy class. This was my family, the people who raised me, who I shared holidays and memories with, who I loved despite everything. But it was also the truth, clear and undeniable, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my mind. What if Richard did take legal action? What would I do? What would I say? Would I lie for my family? Would I tell the truth and tear apart the only life I'd ever known? These questions tormented me, eating away at my sense of self, making me question everything I thought I believed about loyalty and honesty. Richard did take legal action. The lawsuit came faster than anyone expected, and suddenly our picture-perfect family life was thrust into the harsh light of legal scrutiny. Lawyers became regular visitors to our house. My father spent hours in closed-door meetings, his face growing more drawn and stressed with each passing day. My mother's elegant facade started showing cracks, her smiles becoming forced, her voice taking on a sharp edge when she thought no one important was listening. My brother threw himself into defending our father with an almost manic energy, as if by sheer force of will he could make the accusations disappear, and I continued to watch, to listen, to feel myself being slowly crushed under the weight of what I knew. The legal process moved forward like a slow-motion train wreck that I couldn't look away from. Depositions were scheduled, evidence was collected, and throughout it all, my family maintained their carefully constructed story. They were so good at it, so convincing, that sometimes I found myself almost believing them. Maybe I had misunderstood what I heard that night. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe I was the one who was wrong, who was seeing things that weren't really there. This is what gaslighting feels like, by the way. It's not always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, a slow erosion of your own trust in your own perceptions until you don't know what's real anymore. I remember the day I was told I would have to testify. My father sat me down in his study, the same study where I used to do homework while he worked, where he used to help me with math problems and tell me stories about his childhood. He looked tired that day, older than I'd ever seen him look. He put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that once would have made me feel safe and protected, and he explained what would happen in court. He explained what questions I might be asked, and then very carefully, very deliberately, he told me what I should say. Not what had actually happened, but what I should say. He never explicitly told me to lie. He was too smart for that. Instead, he framed it as remembering correctly, as understanding the context, as supporting your family. But we both knew what he was really asking me to do. Have you ever been asked to choose between your integrity and the people you love? It's not a choice anyone should have to make, but life doesn't always care about what's fair. I agreed to testify. I don't know if I actually agreed or if my silence was taken as agreement, but either way my name was added to the witness list. The court date was set, and as it approached I felt like I was walking toward an execution. My own execution, in a way. Because I knew that no matter what I did in that courtroom, no matter what words came out of my mouth, a part of me was going to die. Either my integrity would die, killed by my own lies, or my relationship with my family would die, destroyed by my truth. The night before the trial, I barely slept at all. I lay in bed, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every possible outcome. I thought about Richard, who had been my father's friend, who had trusted him, who had been betrayed. I thought about all the other people who might have been affected by my father's actions, people I didn't even know, whose lives might have been impacted by the money that was taken. I thought about justice and loyalty and truth and family, and I thought about who I wanted to be, what kind of person I could live with being when all of this was over. I still didn't have an answer when the sun came up. The morning of the trial was surreal. My mother insisted we all have breakfast together as if this were just another normal day. She made pancakes, my father's favorite, and we sat around the kitchen table pretending that everything was fine. My brother talked about some project at work. My mother commented on the weather. My father read the newspaper like he always did. And I sat there pushing food around my plate, feeling like I was watching this scene from outside my own body. We got dressed in our most respectable clothes, the kind of outfits designed to make us look like upstanding citizens, like people who could never be involved in anything underhanded. My mother checked everyone's appearance, adjusting ties and smoothing collars, as if we were preparing for a family photo rather than a court appearance. The courthouse was everything I expected, and nothing I expected at the same time. It was an old building with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. Security was tight, with metal detectors and stern-faced guards who looked at everyone with equal suspicion. The hallways were crowded with people, lawyers in sharp suits carrying briefcases, families huddled together speaking in hushed tones, court reporters with their stenography machines. The smell was institutional, a mixture of old wood and paper and something else I couldn't quite identify, maybe anxiety or fear or desperation. We found the correct courtroom and took our seats, my family presenting a united front for anyone watching. Richard was already there with his legal team. Seeing him after all these months was jarring. He looked older too, worn down by the stress of the legal battle, but there was a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When his gaze met mine across the courtroom, I saw something that made my chest tighten. Disappointment. Not anger, not hatred, but disappointment. He had known me since I was a child. He had been to my birthday parties, had given me gifts, had treated me like family. And now, here we were, on opposite sides of a courtroom, and he could see that I was sitting with the people who had wronged him. What must he think of me? The question burned in my mind. The trial began with all the formality and procedure that courts require. The judge entered and we all stood. Lawyers made their opening statements, laying out their cases in language that was both precise and deliberately vague. Richard's lawyer painted a picture of systematic fraud and betrayal, of trust violated and money stolen. My father's lawyer countered with a narrative of misunderstanding and jealousy, of a business partner who couldn't handle my father's success and was now trying to destroy him out of spite. Both versions couldn't be true, yet both were presented with equal conviction. I sat there listening, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white, wondering how the truth could be so flexible, so malleable in the hands of skilled speakers. The first witnesses were called, experts and accountants who testified about financial records and business practices. Their testimony was technical, full of jargon that I didn't fully understand, but the implications were clear enough. Money had moved in ways it shouldn't have moved. Documents had been altered. Signatures had been forged. With each piece of evidence presented, I could feel my father's lawyer working harder to explain it away, to provide alternative interpretations, to cast doubt on the accusations. And my father sat there, his face a mask of calm confidence, looking for all the world like a man who had nothing to hide. He was good at this. They all were. Years of practice at maintaining appearances, at hiding the truth beneath layers of respectability, had prepared them well for this moment. Then came the day when my family was called to testify. My brother went first, taking the stand with the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty in his own righteousness. He was sworn in, his hand on the Bible, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And then he proceeded to lie, smoothly, convincingly, without a single hesitation or stumble. He corroborated my father's version of events, painted Richard as unstable and vindictive, spoke about family loyalty and trust as if these were the values that had always guided our family. I watched him, this person I'd grown up with, and realized I didn't really know him at all, or maybe I did, and that was even worse. My mother was next. If my brother's testimony was confident, my mother's was emotional. She cried at appropriate moments, her voice breaking when she talked about how the accusations had torn apart her family, how painful it was to be attacked by someone they had trusted. She spoke about my father's character, about his generosity and honesty, about the years they'd built their life together. And she lied. She lied with tears in her eyes, with conviction in her voice, with a performance that would have been Oscar-worthy if it weren't so fundamentally wrong. The jury watched her with sympathy, clearly moved by her emotional testimony, and I felt sick to my stomach. This was my mother, the woman who had taught me to always tell the truth, who had punished me as a child when I lied about small things like eating cookies before dinner or breaking a vase. And here she was, lying under oath, lying to protect a lie, and doing it so well that people believed her. Then my father took the stand. This was the testimony everyone had been waiting for, the accused facing his accuser, the moment of truth, or as it turned out, the moment of the biggest lies yet. My father was masterful. He spoke with the authority of someone who had spent decades in boardrooms, negotiating deals, convincing people to see things his way. He explained every questionable transaction, provided context for every suspicious document, had an answer for every accusation. His lawyer guided him through the testimony with practiced ease, setting up questions that allowed my father to present himself as the victim of a vindictive former partner who couldn't accept that the business had moved in a different direction. And watching him, listening to him, I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just lying to protect himself. This was a complete rewriting of reality, a denial so thorough and so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted what I knew to be true. But I knew the truth. I had heard it that rainy night 3 years ago. I had listened to the conversations since then, the strategy sessions, the careful construction of this false narrative. I knew what had really happened, and I knew that everyone currently testifying was lying. The question was, what was I going to do about it? My turn on the witness stand was coming, and I still didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted to believe that I could somehow avoid the choice entirely, that maybe I wouldn't be called to testify after all, that maybe my testimony wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But I knew that was wishful thinking. I was going to be called. My testimony was going to matter, and I was going to have to decide, once and for all, who I wanted to be. The prosecution rested its case, and then it was the defense's turn to call witnesses. My father's lawyer stood up, smoothed his expensive suit, and called my name. The sound of it echoing through that courtroom felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. But it was happening to me. Everyone turned to look at me as I stood up on shaking legs and walked toward the witness stand. The distance from my seat to that stand felt like miles, each step heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. I could feel my family's eyes on me, expectant, confident that I would play my part. I could feel Richard's eyes on me too, that same disappointed look I'd seen earlier, as if he'd already judged me and found me wanting. I was sworn in. My hand was steady as I placed it on the Bible, but inside I was shaking so hard I thought I might fall apart. The bailiff asked me if I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And I said yes. I said yes, but I still didn't know what truth I was going to tell. Would I tell the truth I knew, or the truth my family needed me to tell? Would I be loyal to honesty or loyal to blood? The questions hammered in my head as I sat down, as the lawyer approached, as everyone in that courtroom waited to hear what I would say. My father's lawyer started with easy questions, establishing my identity, my relationship to my father, my presence in the family business peripherally through family dinners and conversations. I answered these questions truthfully because they were safe, because they didn't require me to lie or reveal anything significant. But I knew they were leading somewhere, building toward the questions that would matter, the ones that would force my hand. The lawyer's voice was friendly, almost paternal, designed to make me feel comfortable, to make me trust him, to make me more likely to give him the answers he wanted. And all the while, I could see my father watching me, my mother's hands clasped tightly in her lap, my brother's confident smile that said he expected me to do exactly what they'd coached me to do. Then the lawyer asked me about Richard, about the accusations, about whether I had ever witnessed anything that would support the claims of fraud and embezzlement. This was it. This was the moment. Everything I said from this point forward would matter, would be recorded, would become part of the permanent legal record. I opened my mouth to answer, and I honestly didn't know what was going to come out. My throat felt tight, my heart was racing, and I could feel sweat beginning to form on my forehead despite the cool air in the courtroom. I looked at my family, at their expectant faces, and I felt the weight of everything we'd been through together, all the memories, all the love, all the years of being part of something bigger than myself. But then I looked at Richard, and I looked at the jury, 12 people who didn't know any of us, who were trying to figure out where the truth lay in all of this mess. And I looked at the judge, who represented something bigger than my family, bigger than my personal comfort, something like justice or fairness or the idea that truth actually matters. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along. If I lied now, if I participated in this cover-up, I wouldn't just be protecting my family. I would be becoming them. I would be choosing to be the kind of person who lies under oath, who puts personal loyalty above truth, who participates in injustice because it's easier than standing alone. And I didn't want to be that person. I couldn't be that person and live with myself afterward. I was about to speak, about to make the choice that would change everything, when something unexpected happened. Richard's lawyer, who had been sitting quietly taking notes, suddenly stood up. There was an energy about him that hadn't been there before, a sharpness in his eyes that suggested he'd just realized something important. He asked permission to approach the bench, and both lawyers and the judge had a brief, hushed conversation that I couldn't hear. When they returned, Richard's lawyer was given permission to ask me some questions, a cross-examination that was happening earlier than expected in the process. My father's lawyer looked irritated, but had to allow it. Richard's lawyer approached me slowly, his expression thoughtful. He introduced himself, though I already knew who he was, and then he did something I didn't expect. Instead of asking me about the fraud directly, he asked me about that rainy night 3 years ago. My blood ran cold. How did he know about that? Had someone told him? Had Richard remembered me being in the house that night? The lawyer asked me very specifically, "Were you home on the evening of June 14th, 3 years ago, when Richard Thompson visited your family's residence?" I was trapped. I could lie about being there, but if anyone had seen me, if there was any proof, I would be caught immediately. Or I could tell the truth about being there, which would lead to more questions about what I'd heard. I admitted I was home that night. The lawyer nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he asked if I'd heard anything, if I'd been aware of what was discussed. This was my opportunity. This was the moment where I could either continue with my family's lies or I could begin to tell the truth. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the lawyer had something else up his sleeve, something that would make my choice almost irrelevant, because the truth was about to come out whether I helped it or not. He asked the judge for permission to present a piece of evidence that had just come to his attention, something that had been overlooked in the initial discovery process, but that he believed was crucial to the case. What happened next felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. The evidence the lawyer presented was a recording. Apparently, Richard had started recording conversations with my father weeks before that confrontation at our house, suspicious that something wasn't right with their business finances. The recording from that rainy night existed. Not a complete recording of everything that was said, but enough. Enough to prove that Richard had confronted my father. Enough to capture my father's admissions and justifications. Enough to prove that the story my family had been telling under oath was false. The courtroom erupted in noise. The judge calling for order. My father's lawyer objecting strenuously. My father's face going pale as he realized what was happening. But here's what the lawyer had noticed. The one thing that changed everything. During my brother's testimony, he had claimed that Richard had never visited our house that night, that he had only spoken with my father on the phone, and that the conversation had been brief and cordial. My mother had corroborated this in her testimony. Even my father had maintained this version of events. But when I admitted to being home that night, when I confirmed that Richard had been there in person, I had inadvertently contradicted all of their testimonies. Even if I had planned to lie about what I'd heard, even if I had intended to support my family's version of events completely, this one admission, this one truth, had been enough to unravel their carefully constructed story. The lawyer had been watching for this, I realized later. He had been watching all of us throughout the trial, looking for inconsistencies, for cracks in the facade, for any small detail that didn't quite match up. And he had noticed that when he mentioned that specific date, something in my expression had changed. I had remembered that night, and my reaction had been genuine, had been different from the careful, controlled reactions my family had been giving. He had gambled on asking me about it, and that gamble had paid off because I had told one truth that contradicted 3 lies. And once that crack appeared, once there was any inconsistency in the defense's testimony, the whole structure began to crumble. The judge called for a recess and the courtroom descended into chaos. My father's lawyer was arguing vehemently about the admissibility of the recording, claiming it should have been disclosed earlier, that it was potentially illegal depending on consent laws, that it was prejudicial. Richard's lawyer was countering every argument with case law and precedent. The judge was clearly angry that this evidence had come to light so late in the trial, but was also clearly interested in hearing it, and my family was falling apart before my eyes. My father's mask of confidence had shattered completely. My mother was crying, real tears this time, not the performance tears from her testimony, but genuine fear and anguish. My brother was white-faced and silent, probably calculating how much trouble he was in for perjury. And me? I was still sitting in the witness stand, forgotten in all the chaos, feeling like I was watching my entire world collapse. I had been prepared to make a choice, had been gathering my courage to either lie or tell the truth, and then the choice had been taken away from me. The truth was coming out whether I helped it or not. Part of me felt relieved, like a burden I'd been carrying for 3 years had suddenly been lifted. But part of me felt devastated because I knew what this meant for my family, for my relationship with them, for the life I'd known. This was the moment everything changed, irrevocably and completely. When the court reconvened, the judge ruled that the recording was admissible. It had been legally made according to the state's single-party consent laws, and while its late introduction was problematic, the interests of justice required that it be heard. The recording was played for the jury. Hearing it was surreal, like being transported back to that rainy night 3 years ago. Richard's voice, my father's voice, my mother in the background, my brother chiming in occasionally, all of it captured digitally, preserved perfectly, undeniable. The confrontation, the accusations, my father's justifications, the planning of what story they would tell if anyone asked questions. Everything I had heard from my hiding place on the stairs was now being heard by a courtroom full of people, by a jury who had just heard my family members swear under oath that this conversation had never happened. The impact was immediate and devastating. The jury's expressions changed from attention to shock to something like disgust. The judge's face was stern, clearly displeased with the blatant perjury that had just been exposed. Richard's lawyer requested that the testimony of my father, mother, and brother be stricken from the record and that they be charged with perjury. My father's lawyer tried to do damage control, but there was no controlling this. The recording was clear. The lies were exposed. There was no way to spin this into something innocent or misunderstood. My family had been caught, completely and undeniably, lying under oath to protect my father from the consequences of his actions. I was still on the witness stand when the judge asked me directly if I had heard this conversation that night. There was no point in lying now. The truth was already out, already proven. So I said yes. Yes, I had been home. Yes, I had heard them. Yes, I had known the truth this whole time. The judge asked me why I hadn't come forward sooner, why I had allowed things to get this far, and I didn't have a good answer. How could I explain the complexity of loving people who are doing wrong things? How could I articulate the paralysis that comes from being caught between loyalty and integrity? I just said that they were my family, and I hadn't known what to do. The judge's expression softened slightly, as if he understood, at least partially, the impossible position I'd been in. But the prosecution wasn't done with me. They asked me questions about other things I'd heard over the years, other conversations, other details, and I answered truthfully. At this point, there was no reason to hold back anymore. The dam had broken, and everything was flooding out. I told them about the strategy sessions at dinner, about how my family had coordinated their stories, about the coaching I'd received about what to say if I testified. Every word I spoke felt like a betrayal, but it also felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 3 years. I was telling the truth, the whole truth, and it was simultaneously the hardest and the most liberating thing I'd ever done. My testimony lasted for hours. By the time I was finally dismissed from the stand, I was emotionally exhausted. As I walked back to my seat, I couldn't look at my family. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their shock and anger and hurt, but I couldn't face it. I had just destroyed them, or rather, I had helped expose the destruction they had brought upon themselves. The distinction felt meaningless in that moment. I had been part of their downfall, regardless of whether their downfall was deserved. Instead of sitting back down with my family, I moved to a different area of the courtroom. That physical distance felt symbolic, a representation of the gulf that had just opened up between us. The trial concluded quickly after that. My father's lawyer tried to salvage what he could, but it was hopeless. The prosecution presented the recording and my testimony as conclusive proof of both the original fraud and the subsequent perjury. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. My father was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and multiple counts of perjury. My mother and brother were also charged with perjury. The courtroom was somber as the verdicts were read. None of the dramatic gasps or outbursts you see in movies. Just a heavy silence as justice was served. Sentencing came weeks later. My father received a substantial prison sentence, years behind bars for his financial crimes and the lies he'd told to cover them up. My mother and brother received lighter sentences, their perjury judged less severely than my father's original crimes, but they would still face legal consequences and community service. Richard was vindicated, his claims proven true, his reputation restored. But I don't think he felt victorious. When I saw him after the sentencing, he just looked tired and sad, like someone who had won a battle but lost something important in the process. He told me he was sorry that I'd been caught in the middle of all this, that he'd never wanted to hurt me. I believed him. My family didn't speak to me after the trial, not immediately, and not for a long time afterward. I was dead to them, or at least that's how it felt. I had chosen truth over family loyalty, and in their eyes that was the ultimate betrayal. My father refused to see me when I tried to visit him before he went to prison. My mother sent me a letter, just one, that was filled with hurt and accusation and disappointment. She said I had destroyed our family, that I had sided with an outsider over my own blood, that she didn't know who I was anymore. My brother was more direct in his anger, calling me a traitor in the one phone conversation we had before he blocked my number. And maybe they were right to be angry. I had hurt them, even if I had done so by telling the truth. The aftermath of the trial was one of the darkest periods of my life. I had lost my family, the people who had been the foundation of my existence for my entire life. I had no job, having left my employment when the trial started because of the stress and attention. I had few friends, having isolated myself during the years when my family's secret was weighing on me. I moved into a small apartment, cut off financially from my family, struggling to make ends meet with temporary work. There were nights when I wondered if I had made the right choice, if telling the truth had been worth this price. Would it have been so bad to lie? Would one lie really have mattered that much in the grand scheme of things? These thoughts tormented me during the darkest hours. But then I would remember that courtroom, would remember the faces of the jury members when they realized they had been lied to, would remember Richard's vindication, would remember the principle that truth matters, that justice matters, that some things are more important than personal comfort or family loyalty. And I would know, deep in my soul, that I had made the right choice, even though it was the hard choice. Living with the consequences of telling the truth was difficult, but living with the consequences of lying would have been impossible. I would have become someone I couldn't respect, someone I couldn't live with, and that would have been a worse fate than estrangement from my family. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild my life. I found work, nothing glamorous but honest work that paid my bills and gave me something to focus on besides my own pain. I started therapy, working through the complex emotions of grief and guilt and anger and loss. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, building new relationships based on honesty and authenticity, rather than the careful image management I'd grown up with. I discovered that there was a freedom in living without secrets, in not having to constantly monitor what I said or who I said it to. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the burden of knowing the truth and hiding it, was finally gone. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty to people you love and standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. These experiences shape us in profound ways, and sharing them can help others who might be going through similar struggles feel less alone. About a year after the trial, something unexpected happened. My mother reached out to me. It wasn't a warm reconciliation, not at first. She was still hurt, still angry, but she said she wanted to understand. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us had been to before, and we talked for hours. She told me about how she'd had time to think during the past year, how she'd been forced to confront things about herself and our family that she'd been avoiding for decades. She admitted that she had known what my father was doing was wrong, but had convinced herself that loyalty meant supporting him no matter what. She said she still didn't fully understand why I had done what I did, but she was trying to. That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal or the consequences of everything that had happened, but it was a beginning, a tiny crack in the wall that had been built between us. We started meeting occasionally, slowly rebuilding some kind of relationship. It was different from before, more honest, but also more fragile. We couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't go back to the comfortable lies and surface-level harmony we'd had before. But maybe that was better. Maybe a difficult truth was healthier than a comfortable lie. My brother never reached out. Last I heard, he had moved to another state, started over with a new job and new people who didn't know about the trial. My father was released from prison after serving most of his sentence, and I heard through my mother that he had also moved away, unable to face the community where his crimes had become public knowledge. I don't know if I'll ever speak to either of them again. Part of me hopes for reconciliation someday, but part of me has accepted that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, and that's okay. It has to be okay because I can't change the past and I can't force forgiveness from people who aren't ready to give it. Looking back now, I understand so much more about what happened than I did while living through it. I understand that my family's dysfunction didn't start with that rainy night or even with my father's fraud. It went back generations, patterns of dishonesty and image management, and prioritizing appearance over substance that had been passed down like an inheritance. I understand that my father probably justified his actions to himself, probably convinced himself that what he was doing wasn't really wrong, or that the rules didn't apply to him. I understand that my mother and brother weren't evil people. They were people who had learned to value loyalty and family unity above all else, even above truth. And I understand that I was formed by this same system, which makes my choice to break from it all the more significant. I also understand now that truth-telling isn't always a single dramatic moment. Yes, there was that moment in the courtroom, that instant when everything changed. But the real truth-telling has been a continuous process of learning to live authentically, to say what I mean, to admit when I'm wrong, to refuse to participate in the small everyday dishonesty that accumulates over time. It's been about building a life where I don't have to constantly monitor my words or hide parts of myself, or maintain a false image. It's been about becoming someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. The experience taught me that integrity is not an abstract concept discussed in philosophy classes. It's a lived reality, a choice we make over and over again in small moments and large ones. It's the decision to tell the truth even when lying would be easier. It's the courage to stand alone when everyone around you is going in a different direction. It's the strength to accept consequences rather than compromise your values. And it's hard. God, it's so hard. There were so many moments when I wanted to take the easy path to just go along with my family's lies and avoid all the pain that came from telling the truth. But I couldn't do it. Some part of me, maybe the best part of me, wouldn't let me. I want you to understand something important about this story, about what happened in that courtroom and everything that came after. I'm not a hero. I didn't set out to expose my family, or to be some champion of justice. I was terrified, conflicted, and uncertain right up until the moment when the lawyer's questions cornered me into admitting one small truth that unraveled everything. In some ways, I was lucky that the choice was partially made for me by the existence of that recording. I don't know if I would have had the courage to speak up entirely on my own, without that external pressure. And that uncertainty is something I've had to live with. The knowledge that my morality was tested under specific circumstances, and I can't be entirely sure how I would have responded under different ones. But what I do know is this. When the moment came, when I had to choose between adding my voice to the lies or confirming the truth, I chose truth. And that choice, however it came about, has defined the person I've become. I learned that you can love people and still disagree with them, still refuse to participate in their wrongdoing. I learned that family loyalty is important, but not more important than integrity. I learned that sometimes the right choice is also the painful choice, and you have to be willing to endure the pain to live with yourself. These are lessons I wouldn't have chosen to learn the way I learned them, but they are lessons that have shaped me into someone I can be proud of. If you're going through something similar, if you're caught between loyalty and truth, if you're being asked to compromise your values for the sake of relationships, I want you to know that you're not alone. I know how isolating it feels, how much pressure there is to just go along with things, to not rock the boat, to prioritize peace over principles. And I'm not going to tell you what choice to make because that's something only you can decide. But I will tell you that choosing truth, even when it costs you everything, leaves you with something that no one can take away. Your integrity, your self-respect, the knowledge that you did the right thing even when it was the hard thing. The journey since that courtroom has been long and difficult, filled with grief and healing in equal measures. I've had to grieve the loss of the family I thought I had, the loss of the innocence that came from believing my family was good and honest. I've had to build a new sense of identity, one that isn't defined by my family name or my family's approval. I've had to learn to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own perceptions even when others try to convince me I'm wrong. And I've had to learn that sometimes love means setting boundaries, means refusing to enable behavior even from people you care about deeply. Today, I'm in a better place than I was during those dark months after the trial. I have meaningful work that I believe in. I have friendships built on mutual respect and honesty. I have a relationship with my mother that, while complicated, is slowly healing. I have peace with myself, knowing that I did the right thing even though it cost me dearly. I have learned to live without the constant weight of hidden truth pressing down on me, and I have hope for the future, something I didn't have during those years when I was trapped in my family's web of lies. But I won't pretend it's all perfect now, or that the wounds have completely healed. There are still moments when I see families together, laughing and at ease with each other, and I feel a sharp pain for what I've lost. There are still nights when I wonder what my life would have looked like if I had made different choices, if I had found some way to navigate between truth and family. There are still times when I question whether the price I paid was worth it, even though I know intellectually that it was. Healing isn't linear, and some losses leave permanent marks. That's just part of being human, part of living through difficult experiences and coming out the other side changed. I'm sharing this story with you not to glorify what I went through or to seek sympathy or admiration. I'm sharing it because I believe stories like this need to be told. We live in a world that often prioritizes comfort over truth, that encourages us to look the other way when people we love do wrong things, that values family loyalty above almost everything else. And those aren't bad values inherently, but they can become twisted, can be used to enable harmful behavior, can trap people in situations where they have to choose between their integrity and their relationships. By sharing my story, I hope to give voice to others who have been in similar positions, to let them know they're not alone, to maybe help someone else who is facing their own impossible choice. So what's the takeaway from all of this? What's the lesson I learned from sitting in that courtroom watching my family lie under oath and having to decide what kind of person I wanted to be? The lesson is this: truth matters, justice matters, integrity matters. Not in some abstract philosophical way, but in real, practical, everyday life. The choices we make about honesty and morality shape who we are and the world we create around us. When we lie, even for good reasons, even to protect people we love, we participate in creating a world where truth is negotiable and justice is flexible. And maybe that works out okay in the short term. Maybe we avoid immediate consequences or painful confrontations. But in the long term, those lies accumulate. Those small compromises of integrity add up. And eventually you find yourself in a courtroom where everything has spiraled so far out of control that there's no way to fix it without someone getting hurt. I chose to be hurt rather than to hurt others by participating in lies. I chose to lose my family rather than lose myself. And while that choice has cost me greatly, it has also given me something invaluable: the ability to look at myself in the mirror and know that I did the right thing, that I stood up for truth even when everyone around me was sitting down, that I refused to be complicit in injustice even when the price of that refusal was everything I held dear. That knowledge, that self-respect, has carried me through the darkest times and continues to sustain me today. If this story resonated with you, if you've been moved by what I've shared, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me about times when you've had to choose between difficult options, when you've had to stand up for what's right, even when it cost you something important. Your experiences and perspectives enrich the conversation and help create a community of people who value honesty and integrity, even when it's hard. And if you found value in this story, if it made you think or feel or see things differently, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and it lets me know that sharing my truth, painful as it was, serves a purpose. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales if you haven't already. This channel is dedicated to sharing real stories from real people, stories that are honest and raw and authentic. We don't shy away from difficult topics or uncomfortable truths. We believe that by sharing our experiences, we help others feel less alone. We create space for important conversations, and we challenge the narratives that keep people trapped in silence. So subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us for more stories that reveal the complexity, pain, and beauty of human experience. Understanding the content we share here is so important because these aren't just entertaining stories, though I hope they are engaging. These are life experiences that have shaped people fundamentally, that have taught lessons that can't be learned any other way. When you engage with these stories, when you really listen and think about them, you open yourself up to learning from experiences you haven't had, to seeing perspectives you might not have considered, to developing empathy for situations you've never faced. That understanding can change how you navigate your own difficult moments, can help you make better choices when you face your own ethical dilemmas, can remind you that you're not alone in struggling with the complexity of being human. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, for allowing me to share one of the most difficult periods of my life with you. I know it's not an easy story to hear, just as it wasn't an easy story to live through or to tell. But I believe in the power of truth, both in courtrooms and in YouTube comments, both in legal testimony and in personal narratives. Every time we choose to be honest, every time we share our authentic experiences, we contribute to a world where truth is valued and protected. And maybe that sounds idealistic or naive, but I've lived through the alternative, through a world built on lies and maintained through deception, and I can tell you that this is better. Truth is always better, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything. I hope my story has helped you understand that, has maybe given you courage to face your own truths, whatever they might be. Remember to leave a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales for more authentic stories. Until next time, stay true to yourself, even when it's hard.